All right, Loyal, let's talk about emotions. Um, Big question that we're looking at this week is where are emotions processed? Well, the textbook definition that you'll see is that emotions are processed in the amygdala, and this isn't totally wrong. In fact, it's not wrong. Emotions are processed in the amygdala. The way that this is maybe just a little oversimplified is that emotions aren't only processed in the amygdala. The amygdala is a big part of the emotion equation, but it's not the only part. Um, so we know some things about the amygdala. Negative. So remember lateralization. Let's go back before we go any further into this. Remember lateralization is when some process is localized to only one hemisphere or the other. And so we know that the amygdala is lateralized also. The functions of the amygdala are lateralized. And it looks like the type of emotion, negative or positive, is what's lateralized in the amygdala. Now, this could be like slightly an oversimplification as well, but at least some of the current research and from the last 2 decades shows that this might be true. So it looks like negative emotion tends to be localized to the right side of the amygdala, and the left side may be involved in the dopaminergic reward circuit, which would essentially mean that it's part of positive emotions, part of the reward circuit. So let's parse that apart a little bit. So not every positive emotion is part of the reward circuit, but a lot of our positive emotions are. The reason that people like drugs and chocolate and sex and chocolate and all these other things are because they tie into this reward circuit. Your brain gets flooded with neurotransmitters that it likes, that it prefers. As part of this reward circuit, gambling, all these things activate the reward circuit. Scrolling social media activates the reward circuit. So a lot of positive emotions do. Not all of them. Accomplishing a task, self-actualization, stuff like this, it may in some way, but not as much. So again, there's more to emotions than just what's going on in the amygdala. But, again, you can't downplay the dopaminergic reward circuit in human behavior because a lot of the stuff we do is pushed by that reward circuit. The amygdala, interestingly, is also involved in memory consolidation, and this is a great mix, right? It's a great mix that emotions and memory are tied together. Because if you think of us as learning creatures, one of the things that we do is process information to learn from it for next time. And we experience something that produces a negative emotion. It's great that that is involved, like literally right next to the structures that consolidate memory. Negative experience, memory. Don't do that again. That wasn't good. So you touched a super hot surface, burnt yourself, negative emotion, and then the memory that's consolidated is don't touch that thing again. Okay, good. Similarly, you find something that's great, like a tree that grows, I don't know, chocolate, I guess, and this is a great tree. So you're going to want to remember where the tree is. This is good. This is how animals have survived forever, right? Avoid the thing that makes the negative emotions and approach the thing that makes the positive emotions. And this is life. This is how you get around and survive and produce more of your species. So it's a great mix. It's a really good mix to have next to each other. We should talk about something that I did not put in this slide. Hebbian learning. Hebbian. Hebbian learning. Essentially, you can reduce Hebbian learning to the phrase that you may have heard this before, but things that fire together wire together, right? And so if these two things, if emotion and memory are close to one another and they're firing at the same time, they end up being wired together. And so, because you can experience a negative emotion and then have a memory instantly triggered, you can also experience a memory and have an emotion instantly triggered. The emotion triggers the memory, but because they have been firing together, they end up co-activating one another. And this is how you end up with things like post-traumatic stress disorder or triggering situations, anxiety disorders, things like that. It's an unintended consequence of the way our brains work. It's an unintended consequence of the way our brains work that usually keeps us alive and contributes to the survival of the organism and the species. And in this case, it's a negative outcome of that association. Interesting, though, right? So let's continue talking about where our emotions processed. Is the amygdala the only thing? No way, man. Not at all. Look at all these different places on here. This is where we're looking at memory for a few different things. I just found a picture from a study that I have on my computer, so that I've cited that shows a lot of areas. And so this is looking at memory. This is the wrong picture, but it's similar. So this is looking at activation, but you'll see a similar thing for memory of these types of situations too. And the memory of the situations will also show like nodes all around the brain. So, bad example, because I chose the wrong image, but you will see that in addition to the amygdala, when you look at where's happiness processed, it's not just the amygdala. There's frontal regions. There's a dorsal medial prefrontal cortex. There's all sorts of things, which is in the frontal regions. But things are happening everywhere. So it makes sense. Now, why is this? Because most things that happen in the brain aren't relegated to just like one node activating. There's a couple things that might be, but those are super low level. I'll talk about those in a second. Most things are processes. They're network processes. So it's not just happening in one area. It's happening in networks across the brain. Remember, we talked about default mode network. We've talked about, when we talked about working memory, there's multiple places where working memory, where the brain is active during working memory tasks. So again, that's all network-based things. It's one thing that we do, but it's not processed in just one area in the brain. It's multiple areas functioning all at once to accomplish one task. If you think of my job, I'm accomplishing one task. I'm giving this lecture. But it's not just the node here, me, that's doing that, right? Like I have to get paid, which means there's someone in payroll making sure that my checks go through. There's admin people assigning classes. There have to be students in the classes for me to teach a class. So there's all sorts of, it's a big network. It's a large system in place for one node to actually do the thing. And that's the same for the brain as well. I also mentioned there are few things that are like single node structures. If you've taken language science with me, you might remember that some of those are single neuron studies, right? So the cats, looking at distinctive features. There are single neurons that'll respond to like a line or like a straight up and down vertical line, a slightly diagonal line. I can't get my hand to be. There we go. Diagonal line, a curve, stuff like this that a single neuron will respond to that. And also in the auditory regions, it's hard to say that it's a single neuron because it's not once you get over a certain frequency. But for just processing frequency, you could say like, oh, a 200 hertz tone. There's a neuron that might respond to 200 hertz. And then it goes to like a group because neurons don't fire fast enough to process over 5,000 hertz. But say for 10,000 hertz, there's like a group of 4 neurons that respond to 10,000 hertz. And this is like really low level stuff. And those neurons don't directly feed into what reaches cognitive awareness. Those neurons will feed into a group of other neurons that like puts together the pattern of activation. So if you're thinking about reading, then it is a distributed systematic process. You have to use the neurons that are looking at all the distinctive features that put those together into letters, that put those together into words, that then conjure ideas of what those words can mean from top down and bottom up processes. So reading is everything. It's a distributed systematic process, but looking at just the orientation of a line might be a single neuron. Listening to music or someone speaking, again, is a huge distributed process, but you could point to a few neurons if you're just looking at like what processes 200 hertz. But processing 200 hertz isn't the same thing as listening to music. So, the brain's complicated, man. And like all the things that it does are also complicated. Okay. So then the other thing I want to talk about is that some emotions are a little bit less complex than others. You can have things like love, extremely complex. It involves happiness. It involves all sorts of different associated. Well, there's multiple different kinds of love, first of all. And so because there's so many different kinds of love, you associate slightly different areas because there's memories involved. There's associations involved, things that you can do with those different people, like, oh, we like hiking or family dinner or something like that. And this is all rolled into that. And then you get things like just anger, which are a little less complex. So some are a little bit more complex than others. And some are a little bit more, just an emotional state. So I don't do a ton of work in processing emotions outside of auditory emotions. And since, this is ostensibly it's a class just about the brain, but it is from speech and hearing. And so let's talk a little bit about auditory information and emotions. And this is where my research actually comes in. So this is a study that I did for my dissertation when I got my PhD, looking at positive and negative emotions associated with different auditory patterns, let's say. So I'm going to teach you a couple words here really quickly. Consonance and dissonance. You may also know consonance as harmonicity. But essentially, if you look at the piano right here, this is a very consonant sound. These are all the harmonics on top. If you don't know what harmonics are, you probably haven't taken another class with me, and that's fine. I just talk about harmonics all the time. That's all that means. But this is your first class with me. Harmonics are essentially you have a note. Harmonics make up timbre, and timbre is what differentiates that was unplanned. I just happen to have a guitar with me all the time. Timbre is what differentiates this So what differentiates the guitar from the whistle? Same note, I'm kind of off key there, but same note. Just lie and say that it is. I understand it's not quite on. I think I'm anyway. It's fine. Same note, but you can tell that one's a whistle and one's a guitar, right? And the way that you can do that is timbre. Timbre is what differentiates those two. They have the same fundamental frequency, which is the pitch that you're hearing, but the pattern of harmonics on top of those is different. And so the pattern of harmonics is timbre. The sound that differentiates a guitar from a trumpet, from a whistle, from a recorder, that's all timbre, even though they're playing the same note. And the timbre is made up of the pattern of harmonics. So again, looking back at the piano here, these are nicely spaced out harmonics. You can see it's just even, like stair step, doot, 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 doot. Each one is just a little bit shorter than the last. They're evenly spaced. It's a very consonant sound. It's a very harmonic sound. There's a high degree of harmonicity in this. All those are basically the same term. Okay, let's look at something like the hawk screech down here. First of all, there's not a lot of harmonic structure that you can see. Like, you can see harmonic structure in the piano. You can see harmonic structure in the voice and the trumpet. These peaks, they're there. They have a different pattern of what's tall and what's not tall, but they have peaks. And as you go down this way, there starts to become fewer peaks. It's just a lot of everything, just a lot of noise. So noise is very dissonant, just like that's a dissonant sound, the opposite of consonance, right? It has low degree of harmonicity is another way of saying that. And so this hawk screech, you can tell there's a lot of energy everywhere, but no distinct peaks until you get down here. There's a couple. And so that's just a very dissonant sound. So what this map is showing you is I took all these sounds, some animal sounds, a human voice, some instrument sounds, and some natural sounds and man-made sounds, just all the sounds that I could find, and had people rate these on a few different things. Well, actually on one thing, which was the similarity, how similar each sound was to each other sound. Frequency for all these was like digitally controlled. So they were all presented at the same frequency, so people wouldn't be tempted to rate like, oh, these are kind of high pitch, so they're the same, but this is low pitch, so it's not. Everything's presented at the same frequency. So that what they're actually rating is like the timbre of the sound is what I wanted them to focus on. Then I measured the degree of consonance in here, so like where these harmonic partials are and how regular the spacing between them is. That's how we measured consonants. And we also looked at the slope. You can see that some of these slope down at a fairly okay rate. These are a little bit less gradual slopes. These are pretty quick. And then over here you get like not slopes at all. You kind of go straight across. And so that was the other thing we looked at, the slope of the spectral envelope is what that's called. The biggest takeaway here is that I also had a second group of people rate all of these sounds on what was preferred and what was not preferred. And consonants and preference are very highly correlated. So what people like is very closely related to what has a consonant structure. So in a way, you can say that like consonant things are positive and dissonant things are negative. So what happens in the brain when we have people listen to a consonant sound and a dissonant sound is essentially where we're going next. So this is kind of a low end design. 6 different people listening to positive, negative, and control sounds in an fMRI. And this is what we found. Well, first of all, before I tell you about this, for the positive sound, we actually didn't see much going on at all. Just the auditory cortex. So the superior temporal gyrus, the auditory cortex, Heschel's gyrus. These are all names for the same thing. And all we saw for positive sound was primary auditory cortex, which just means that people were listening to the sound. Great. Okay. So auditory attention. That's all we found there, which is fine. We need to know that people are paying attention to the sound, and that's cool, but this isn't something that we could write a paper about. What becomes something that we could write a paper about is what was happening when people are listening to the negative sounds, the sounds that they didn't like, or we could also say the negative emotion, the sounds that produced the negative emotion. What they ended up generating was this frontoparietal network, which is also called the oddball detection network. So these were negative sounds, and it generated activity in a oddball detection network. We didn't actually find amygdala activation in this. Probably the sounds were just not producing a strong enough negative reaction to get amygdala. So it wasn't like you're eating rotten noodles or something like that. That would probably produce amygdala. We did find insula, and the insular cortex is also associated with some emotions, especially visceral emotions. So like cringing because a sound is too gross, and also rotten noodles making you want to throw up. That's also a visceral emotion. So the insula, the amygdala, they both are active for emotion. But then, like I said, there's tons of other areas that are also active for negative emotions. So we found the insula and the rest of this oddball detection network. And essentially this is telling us that most sounds that you hear in a day are consonant. Most sounds are consonant. And it's unusual to hear a negative sound, a dissonant negative sound. So the sound is dissonant. We don't hear it as much. We don't like it as much. And that's why it generates this oddball detection network. So let's move a little bit forward into other auditory information. Actually, now speech information. It's also auditory. And emotions. Before we get there, let's really quickly talk about illusions. So I'm a cognitive scientist, and one of the things that we do is we look at illusions, visual illusions, auditory illusions, all the kinds of illusions, like all the cool things that you see on the internet about the dress, the black and white and gold, blue and black dress. That's auditory or visual. It's not an auditory illusion. It's a visual illusion. Yanny Laurel is an auditory illusion. These kind of things are visual illusions. And so essentially what I'm showing you here is that this color down here and this color are the same color. Right? It doesn't look like they are, but they are. I throw this bar over. What I did was I just grabbed one of the colors, like color picker, and then make a bar that's that color. It looks like the color of the bar changes. Like I put a gradient on it. I didn't put a gradient on it. This is the color of the bar. This like brownish gray. And so it's showing you that these are the same. So this is an illusion, right? That these are the same color, but our brains can't comprehend that they're the same color. They don't look the same color. One looks bluish green and the other one looks brownish red. Purplish red, maybe? But what's going on is there's a process. So when we find illusions, this is indicating that there's some sort of cognitive process going on where we usually see stuff like this in the world, and we've had to come up with a cognitive process to allow us to see the world correctly. And then when we manipulate it in a certain way, we find an illusion. So we're just kind of tricking our brains that are usually working well. And that's what's going on with this illusion here. So what's actually happening is if we had two of these weird Rubik's Cubes and you put one in red light and one in green light, it would change the colors in this way. So what's really happening in the real world would be you have two Rubik's Cubes that have all the same colors on them, and those colors get changed a little bit by the light that they're in. So let's say you put one in a red box, one in a green box, and the light shines off those colors, and it looks like one's in red light, one's in green light, but really they're the same color. That's called color constancy, and we've had to learn how to do that because things don't change color. Here's a coaster that I have that I like to use. It doesn't change color when I shade it. Where's the light coming from? Okay, we'll do this a different way. It doesn't change color when I put it closer to the when I turn it towards the yellow light, and the yellow light shines off of it. Like it does. If you pause this video and you measured the color here, it's going to be a lot more orange in the video than this orientation. It's more red here. But we know, our brains know, that the actual thing that I'm holding didn't change color. It's not like a screen. It can't do that. It's paint. It's not going to change, right? So we know that different situations change the color that reaches our eyes. And so what we do is, if you're a photographer or a videographer, you know about white balancing. And if you don't know about that, what's essentially going on is you can, with a camera, picture or video, you can point it at something that's white, like a piece of paper, in a different lighting situation, and then correct the color for that to show up as white. And it basically just changes all the colors so that one picture taken in one lighting looks the same as those same group of people taken in another lighting. They have to do this in film all the time so that when they go from the green screen room to outdoors, it doesn't look totally different because it's supposed to be in the same place. So they have to color correct everything so it all looks seamless. Our eyes do this too. Our eyes know that one of these is in green and one of these is in red, and so it like removes the green and red from these and tells us what the actual color is. So it's hard for us to figure out that these are the same colors. So what do you need to take away from this? What you need to take away from this is what cognitive scientists do is when there is an illusion, we know that that means there's something going on. There's a time when information reaching your senses doesn't necessarily match what it should. So we've had to develop a way to account for that. And that means that there's some sort of cool cognitive process going on, like color constancy, if there's an illusion that you can exploit there. So we know that there are some auditory illusions. There's an association between pitch and loudness. You can make pitch go up, boop, and it'll sound like it gets louder as it rises in pitch. You can do the same thing with loudness. If something gets louder, it'll sound like it gets higher in pitch. Pulse rate and loudness too. If something gets faster in pulse rate, it's going to sound louder, even if it doesn't get louder. Same thing, if it gets louder, it seems like it gets a little faster in pulse rate. And it seems like there's an association between timbre and pitch. So some vowels sound higher than others. Go ahead, you're watching this, and presumably you're alone. So say E, and now say and which one of those sounds higher to you? Try to say them at the same pitch. Don't say E and but say them at E, which one sounds higher to you? And then also, if you just did this on the bus, like, you didn't have to. You could have waited. Now everybody thinks you're weird. The E sounds higher, right? Does that hold true when we do correct them for fundamental frequency? Like, what if what's happening is, yeah, E sounds higher to us because we are producing it at a higher frequency, and that's why, because we just can't not produce it at a higher frequency. That could be true. So what happens when we do hold that constant? You know what? I'm sorry. We have to go back for a second because I have an auditory illusion here that I want you to hear. But OBS Studio, I have to open an auditory audio output capture so you can actually hear it. And it's probably going to be really loud. I'm going to turn it down. Okay. Which one of those sounded like there was a much larger change in pitch? First one or second one? Larger change in pitch. I feel like the first one is larger. And then this is like D-dude. They're the same. They're the same. So what's going on here is this is like the oh no, I forgot the word. The Doppler illusion. Okay, so there's a Doppler effect. There's a real Doppler shift. There's one in astronomy too. So if you take an astronomy class, you know about that. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the sound one. The real Doppler effect is that if something is coming towards you, the frequency that you get is higher than if it's moving away from you. There's a true frequency that it's giving off. The frequency that you hear as it's coming towards you is higher than the true frequency. The frequency you hear when it's moving away from you is lower than the true frequency. That's the Doppler effect. And it's not an illusion. But there is an illusion also. And the illusion is how much the true Doppler effect changes. The true Doppler effect changes like that second one, the deet doot. It's not much, depending on the speed of the object. I mean, I can't give you how much it does because it depends on the speed. It also depends on the frequency that it's letting off, but it's not a lot for like a police siren, ambulance going past you. It's really not that big of a change in frequency. Deet doot, if you just measure it, the true frequency. But it sounds like it's a lot more than it actually is. Why does it sound so much more woo like that than what's actually going on? Because loudness is also baked into this, and we perceive loudness, changes in loudness, as changes in pitch. So the ambulance, as it's coming closer to you, is getting louder, and then it's getting quieter as it's moving away. So that becomes a larger change in pitch to you in your perception, even though really it's not. And there it was again, just for fun, because, PowerPoint likes to play those things multiple times. Okay, so why does E sound higher than and does it sound higher than when it's controlled for fundamental frequency? So once again, what we had people do is listen to all these different phonemes controlled for fundamental frequency and rate the similarity. And what happens is we do end up seeing that E sounds a lot higher than even when they're controlled for fundamental frequency. So people are still perceiving E as higher than So it looks like there is something going on with timbre that makes people perceive a change in pitch. And then there's also harmonicity baked into this too. And we just talked about harmonicity. So remember, there's a is all the way over here, oo is all the way over here. A and oo opposites in terms of harmonicity. E and opposites in terms of pitch, basically. So E, oo, E, a, oo. Those are the four opposites that we're going to keep talking about through the rest of this video. We looked at how these were produced by people in scat singing in interview podcasts and in lyrical singing. And what happens is the E phoneme is produced a lot higher than the phoneme in scat singing. In interview-based podcasts, it's produced a little higher than the And in lyrical singing, of course, there's no effect because you just conform the phonemes that you're singing to the song that you're singing. So there's nothing inherent that makes us produce an E higher than an We can not do that. And that's what the lyrical singing shows us. The other thing that this shows us is that we do, even when we're just talking off the cuff, like I'm doing right now, the E is produced a little bit higher than the And the reason why it might be produced a little bit higher than the is because of this effect. There might be a few things going on. There could be musculature that's doing it. There could be face shape that's actually doing that. And it could be that we produce E higher than because we perceive E to always be higher than And so we just have learned this through the course of hearing it over time. And then scat singing. What's cool about scat singing is the goal with scat singing is to try to use your voice to replicate like other instruments, to really widen out your vocal range. And using E so high and so low shows that people that are scat singing are using this illusion to widen their vocal range. Maybe the pitch actually isn't as wide as, it's just as wide as if somebody in lyrical singing, but it might sound wider because they're using the correlation between timbre and pitch that we perceive. So it sounds higher, even though it might not be. Okay, and then there I'm circling E, oo. So keep an eye on those. Okay, so let's look at this another way. We've already looked at how people produce phonemes, but let's look at when people produce phonemes. So we asked people to recreate sounds using vowels. In this study over here on the left, we wanted people to mimic an 8 kilohertz sine wave, which that's 8,000 hertz. That's really high. And then we also wanted them to mimic a 60 hertz sine wave, which is extraordinarily low. The human range of hearing is 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. The lowest we can possibly hear, the highest we can possibly hear. And that's like the extreme. What all of us watching and doing this and watching this can actually hear is probably not 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. We probably are not up to 20,000 hertz anymore. Even 15-year-olds aren't up to 20,000 hertz anymore. It just comes with aging, with that's just kind of backing off. And so the older you are, you can expect that the less close to 20,000 you get. And then 20 hertz is like, man, it has to be real loud to hear 20 hertz. Most things are not produced loud enough that you can actually hear 20 hertz. When I'm listening through these headphones, and these are like, I spent more on these headphones than like I probably should have. So they're like good studio monitor Sony headphones. Like 45 is 50 is like the lowest I can actually hear in these. I can play a 20 hertz tone through them, but the diaphragm isn't large enough to actually like allow me to hear that. So functionally, it's a little bit more restricted than 20 hertz to 20,000. So like 50 to 45 to 15,000, maybe something like that is your functional range. But 20 hertz to 20,000 is where we can possibly hear. So my point of all that is saying like, this is a really low sound. It's lower than a human could actually make. And it's really higher than a human can actually make. And what we want them to do is use a vowel to replicate these sounds. So gray bars are showing you when people are trying to mimic an 8,000 hertz sound, mostly using the E phoneme. That's that little I over there, right here. And then to replicate the phoneme, most people are using, nope, sorry, said that totally the wrong way. To replicate the really low sound, most people are using the phoneme, which is over here. The black bar is showing what people are using to replicate the phoneme. What's interesting about this is even if they're not using E and they're using things closer to E to do the high pitch and closer to do the low pitch. I think. That's my next things. Okay, so this is the 256 hertz sine wave and the cicada buzz. What you just heard there, 256 and cicada buzz. People are trying to mimic those now. And interestingly, to mimic the cicada buzz, most people are using a. And to mimic the 256 hertz sine wave, most people are using oo. So once again, what are we seeing as opposites here? E and a and oo. And this is, they're just told, recreate these sounds with a vowel. That's the only constraint we put on them. Didn't need to hear those again. Sorry about that. Okay. So then we're getting closer to swear words. Remember, this is where we're heading. So we had participants either speaking American English on the left in green or Pinyin Mandarin on the right in blue. And they're asked to rate the positivity, either positive or negative, of nonsense, consonant, vowel, consonant words with either an E or an as the vowel in the middle of those consonant, vowel, consonant words. And what we found is most word pairs with E in them are viewed as more positive, and most word... I'm saying the wrong thing. I'm conflating two ways of explaining this. Most words with E in them are positive, and most words with in them are negative. So E is moving in the more positive direction. Remember, E and we're seeing those emerge as opposites of one another, like opposite sounds, opposite ends of a spectrum. And we're seeing E being associated with positive and being associated with negative. We did the same thing using a and oo. Those are the other two that we see emerging as opposites to each other. And what we see is that I wrote the wrong word on here. A is more rousing. Oo is really calming. A is more rousing, not less. Sorry about that. So it's more rousing. A is more rousing. So again, we've got two opposites. E, a, oo. E is positive, is negative. A is a lot of attention. Oo is calming. And then we get to where we've been meaning to go, the swear words. So we're looking at swear words, British and American swear words. And what we see is that there are different usage rates for phoneme in swear words versus not swear words. Orange bars are just random British words. You're just looking at British words here, but the pattern is true for American words as well. So orange bars, again, are just regular words. Blue bars are swear words. And what you see is that there's a lot more swear words with and there's a lot more swear words with I've got a note on why the orange bar here is so high. It's actually not that high, but we'll talk about that in just a second. So the two most preferred phonemes for swear words are and a. Two phonemes that were on the opposite end of two other phonemes, E and oo. And what about those? So oo, look at that. There's no swear words that use oo. And E, where's my E? There's few, but some swear words that use E. Okay, so that's interesting. Let's talk about this thing here. Because the words, the random words using is much higher here than it should be. And that's because I've conflated the actual phoneme with the schwa phoneme. So schwa, if you're not familiar, if you're not in the speech and hearing program or you haven't got to those classes yet, the schwa is like if you say information, the shun at the end of information, that's a schwa. It's unstressed. It's the unstressed sound that the vocal tube makes. And it's kind of an it's kind of an it's kind of in between. It's just unstressed. And this is a totally different phoneme from the stressed There's different constriction going on with So fun is different than information. But they're conflated in this graph. So when you break those apart, when you break apart and shun, what you actually see is this blue bar here stays just as high as it was, and this orange bar gets cut down to about the same height as and then there's just like a ton of schwas in regular words and none in swear words. The reason for that's not actually that crazy. Most swear words aren't long enough for there to be unstressed syllables, so that's the reason why there's a difference there. But what's important to note is preferred for swear words, preferred for swear words. Those two sounds on the opposite ends of the spectrum that we were looking at, these two here. Okay, so we talked about this. This is the schwa. Does this pattern hold true around the world? So first of all, let's look right here in North American English. We see the same thing. We see a lot of swear words using we see a lot of swear words using and then all the swear words tend to be within this red line right here. There's a few outside, but most of them are in here. And interestingly, what is not included inside that line is E and oo. E and oo, here's E, here's oo, are not included in this. And they are also the speech sounds that we use to talk to small animals and small humans, right? So instead of shoes, put on your shoes, babies wear booties, right? Dogs go out for walkies, all sorts of things like that. We're adding E and oo all the time for infant-directed speech. And infant-directed speech is also directed at animals. So we have these two phonemes that are often directed at kids and animals, little cute things. And then they are the opposite of the phonemes that are most preferred for swear words, and oo. And sorry. So on the other end of E and on the other end of oo. And this pattern mostly-ish holds true across other languages. So here's Mexican Spanish, and you see that there are more swear words down below this line than up here. There's only 5 different vowels in Mexican Spanish, or 7 depending on who you talk to, 5 to 7. Some people make some distinction in there. That's not just for Mexican Spanish, that's for Spanish in general. The reason I use Mexican Spanish here is because, first of all, that's the one I speak better. And second, the swear words are different because swear words tend to be more like slang. And Mexican Spanish and Spain Spanish have developed differently over the last 500 years. So you have to choose. Same with North American English and British English. There's a lot of similar swear words, but there's some that are not the same. There was legitimately one British swear word. I'm not going to say it because I don't know how bad it is. I had never heard of it. I'd never seen it. There's 2 A's together in a row. It's just totally ridiculous. German kind of holds true in German as well. So you can see, like, here's the swear word. Again, the red bar is swear words. So there's more propensity to use these sounds in swear words, unless on the other side of this line, E has none. Just like similar pattern as English, similar pattern as Mexican Spanish. U has few. Similar pattern again between the other languages. So it seems like the same region holds all of your swear word sounds, and outside of that region, there aren't as many. What I've done here is I've taken this and ordered these by harmonicity, and you can see that there's no effect for non-swear words. Harmonicity doesn't matter for non-swear words, but for swear words, the harmonicity does matter. And in fact, the more harmonic the sound is, the less likely it is to be used. In a swear word, the less harmonic a sound is, the more likely it is to be used in a swear word. A is the least harmonic phoneme in North American English. Not by much, right? Like voices are all pretty harmonic, and so we can just say like in increments. But it's important to note that all voices tend to be pretty harmonic. It's not like there's not like we all develop a pathology when we say ah or something like that. It's still ah. It's just slightly less harmonic. So let's talk about swear words really quickly. What the heck's going on? Like, why do they cluster in those areas? It doesn't even make a ton of sense, right? Like, well, most swear words didn't start as swear words. So I guess, like, let's quickly point out that the words that I'm using in this, there's 4 different kinds of swear words. And I've made this distinction in the paper that I wrote about this. I didn't make the first distinction about the 4 different types of swear words. I made the distinction about what to call them. So there's sacred, sexual, scatological, and slurs. And I'm not using sacred or slurs. And the reason is, I've got two fingers up here. The reason is that I'm not using sacred or slurs is because those words come from other things. Like they're the names of people, or they're the names of places, or they're a descriptive word about something. So the actual phonemes are not driving anything. It's much less likely to drive anything with those because they're all derived from something else. But so YouTube doesn't have a fit. I'm not going to use any like swear words right now, but let's talk about crap. Crap used to be, my dad has told me stories of getting slapped in the mouth by his grandma for using the word crap. So at one time, crap was just as bad as any of the other swear words that you can imagine. And so it's not now, but we can use it as a good example that we can actually say. It originally meant stuff, like chaff in a field. That's what it was, chaff. So it wasn't a swear word. It was just a word for stuff. Then it took on the meaning of like feces, like, oh, there's feces, because like feces is laying around, animal feces, and I guess back then probably also human feces, like it's just laying around. So stuff in a field, now that's taken on sort of a feces term, but again, not yet a swear word. Then over hundreds of years, it takes on a swear word connotation. But why was that the one that took on the swear word connotation? There was also chaff. There was also stuff. There was also debris. There was also all these other words that could have become the ones that were the swear words, but they didn't. Crap became the swear word. This is true for the F word. It wasn't used in the dirty sense until the mid 1500s. It probably did mean intercourse earlier than that, because there are people. Oh, good, I took it out. There's a guy, his surname uses this word as his last name in the 1200s, 1300s, something like that. And so it was used, and it was used in the same way. And it may originally have come from a word meaning to hit. And so, but it wasn't a swear word for hundreds of years. And then it kind of took on this like dirtier copulatory sense. And then by the 1700s, you didn't say it because it was a swear word. Same thing for crap. The story is similar for what I will call the S word. I've never not said that word, but here we are in a video, so I guess I have to. Interestingly, poop originally referred to flatulence. It was just a word. Well, first it was trumpeteering term. So like you blow your trumpet and it's a poop, and then it became a fart, and then it became feces. But what's interesting is poop starts as just nothing, then becomes a fart, and then becomes like the cutesy word for feces. Crap starts as stuff, then through time becomes the not cutesy word for feces. One of 2 or 3 not cutesy words for feces. Same for the F word. Starts as just a word, like the word sex, and then becomes a swear word later. So it's kind of like filtered through time and through usage that these have become swear words. And it seems when we can see a systematic change like this, that there's a reason why the swear words become the swear words. And it might be related to the phoneme. The phoneme is related to negative feelings. We just saw that with the totally fake CVC words, that is related to negative, and is related to like more attention. Not necessarily in a good or bad way, just more attention, not calming. So these two, they're not calming and negative. And maybe that's why those words ended up becoming the swear words. So that takes us to the last place, and that takes us back to emotion. This is the Russell circumplex model, which was published in 1980. It's a round, like a circular model of emotion that basically just describes you can take every emotion and cut them down into valence and arousal. Valence is positive, negative. Arousal is like high or low activity states. And so happy is like it's clearly high valence. And it's like moderately, it's a little above the midline in terms of like how activated you are. If you're overjoyed and excited, you're all the way up here. If you're calm, which is still positive, you're down here. And then likewise, we can look at angry, which is negative but high arousal. Sleepy is neither positive nor negative, but just low arousal. So that's how the Russell circumplex model works. And what's interesting is with this is we can have people vocalize certain words that make sense all the way around the Russell circumplex model. Hey, dude, and the F word can all be used to describe all of these different emotions all the way around the circumplex model. And we had people come into the lab and do that. And what they did was, let's take a look at this. So they said all these words all the way around the circumplex model. So 3 different words, 8 different places around the circumplex model, all these different emotions. Say hey with an angry emotion. Say hey in a happy emotion. And then we pulled some predictors out of those words. The fundamental frequency, the formants. So if you're not a speech and hearing student, the formants are essentially the peaks of those harmonics that we were talking about earlier. So the peak harmonics, not every harmonic, just the really tall ones, the ones where there's a noticeable peak. The bandwidths of the formants, which is like how wide the peaks are. And the duration of the vowel. What we found was, so what we did, throw this through a regression equation, looking at valence and arousal. So we know where the emotions are on the circumplex model, and we can see which of these predict that emotion. And what we found was, for valence, we've got fundamental frequency, the duration, and the first formant. So when you're talking about valence, emotion becomes more positive, the fundamental frequency increases. This is obvious. You're like, yeah, like you're high pitch, right? The vowel gets a little bit longer, which I think you could hear there when I said yeah. And then also the first formant decreases. That's an interesting one. The first formant decreases. And then for arousal, the significant predictors are the fundamental frequency, the second formant, and the duration again. As emotions become more energetic, F0 increases, fundamental frequency increases. So again, that I gave you works in both of those cases. The F2 increases, second formant increases, and the duration decreases. So more energetic, shorter, but happier, longer. And so if you're like real, if you imagine that you're like totally baked, but you're happy, so your arousal's low, your valence is high, you're like, yeah, the duration is like super long. But then if you are angry and in a highly aroused state, you're just like, nope, real short. Right? So the duration's totally short. But what's really interesting about this is the first formant and second formant. First formant related to valence, second formant related to arousal. And so this is kind of what that looks like. This is a cloud of where different phonemes are made. Not every phoneme has the exact same format 1, format 2. There's a cloud of points around there. For different people, and even for the same person, they might make, they'll have different formats for one phoneme. And what we think might be going on is emotion here, like more energetic, so arousal moves the phonemes in this way, and our other Russell circumplex model dimension, positive, negative, or valence, moves your phonemes in this direction. So emotion is baked into speech. It is there. And that means it's also baked then into the way that we're interpreting speech. Like we hear this, our brains process it, and we understand the emotion conveyed by the speech. All right. That's it for emotions and sounds. And I will see you next time.